Hello everybody, this is the John Crow, and in this particular tutorial I'm going to show you how to make a 3-player game over type scenario. So if I hit tab just to show you how this works, I'm going to run over to these trees that are set to kill me. I've just got no kind of messages here. Trees will kill me, so I'm going to use them to test the system. If you look over here, it's an example of a 3-life game system. I think it's 4. I think I might have set a 4th one here. And I'm just trying to figure out how I could adapt this more dynamically to open up, let's say, 10 lives, sort of gain life as you collect something in the scene. But right now it's a 3 or 4 life deal. So I'm just going to die. You can see it triggers a number pad here that says 2nd life. So over here, it's still on. If I go back under a tree again, and die. You can see it triggers a 3rd number pad that says life 3. And if I go and collect my 4th life, I die again. So now I'm on to my final life. So that's how I envisioned it. I'm looking to build it out a little bit more, but I thought I would just show you mechanically how I set it up. So for this, I'm actually going to exit out and I'm going to build a brand new level here, just a 1x1. Let's call it test death. It says. Ominous. So in this land right here, I need something that's going to kill me, and I'm going to change a few things. So I need to go to the global parameters, and under the controller, I need to understand what components I'm using here. And what we'll notice here is the characters respawning, but more specifically here on our instant death message, it's using the word kill, and we're going to be a little bit more specific for our particular avatar. I'm going to set the death message in this case to kill.u. So our system is going to be able to understand when we specifically kill the avatar and not any other agent or NPC in the scene that is receiving that kill or getting that instant death message kill. So from there, I'm going to build something that's going to kill me, and in the example I was using trees, so why not? Let's just use a tree. Maybe it's time for the trees to kill us, so let's just use a palm tree. And use a little technique Cyber Dragon was using in his teleporting system. I use the detect entity here, and I'll just say die. And when the character gets inside of that system, not only once, we're going to kill.u. So that should trigger the character's death. If I just quickly test that, run into the zone, and the character dies, run into the zone. Here it doesn't seem to kill the character off the same object, so I'm actually just going to set a couple of them here so I can run to them 3 times. So 1 death, 2 death, and 3 death. And you can see, of course, in this scenario here, I could just keep dying and dying and dying, and I don't necessarily want to do that. So now that I've modified the global parameter so that the avatar dies specifically on the kill.u message, let's go and set up the logic to make this work, the chain to make this work. So for this, we really just need 3 number pads, and I like the number pads just because I think they're the smallest object that you can have here in the sandbox. I don't know if there's any item or prop that's any smaller. But essentially with these number pads, we're going to need to use 2 devices per object, essentially. So on each one of them, we're going to use the message broadcaster. We're going to have a message broadcaster that's cleaned off on each one of them. And we're also going to use the toggle behavior. So we'll use the toggle behavior. The toggle behavior is going to allow us to increment our avatars' deaths and keep track of them in much the same way that Cyber Dragon was using the checkpoint feature. We're going to kind of use it for a deaths feature, and hopefully it works. And so we also need to have a defeat condition that triggers a defeat once we go through our 3 lives. So we'll take our message broadcasters, our toggle behaviors, and we'll culminate them over here in a message that gets sent out at the very end. We won't use a button. We will get rid of this. We need the defeat behavior here, and the defeat condition that we're going to use to receive and trigger the death screen would be the 3rd life. So in the tutorial I was referencing, it was using checkpoint 1, checkpoint 2, and checkpoint 3. So in our case, we'll use life.1, life.2, and life.3. So if we go through our 3rd life and we die, it's going to trigger the defeat screen. So let's go to all 3 of them, and let's set them up. We're going to take off the default behavior. It'll be nice when presets come out, so you can get rid of that. But I'm going to use a message broadcaster and use a toggle behavior. And for verification, you can also use on the 2nd and 3rd of our objects, we also need a 3rd element, and that would be a speaker component. So these 2 here use the speaker component along with a toggle behavior. We've got the message broadcaster, and that's the same on those. So the first one doesn't need the speaker. The first one pretty much is the character already in their first life, so this is how they're starting. This is kind of like an initial state for the character's life, and it's not until we trigger the 2nd life, and when we die, the 2nd life triggers the 3rd life, and when that one dies, we trigger the defeat here. So this is defeat, game over kind of thing. And my hands aren't working to actually write. So yeah, let's get that going here. I'm also going to add the 2 speaker components onto the 2nd and the 3rd elements, and we can begin to set this up. So if I begin by editing the logic, we'll start off in the message broadcaster, and the message broadcaster in this one is waiting for the message kill.u. So remember, this is the specific message that the character receives when it is killed, or this is the message that triggers the instant death in the character. And so this is going to help us cycle through our lives. So we're receiving the message kill.u. We only want to broadcast the message once, only one time, because we only have the 1 life. And we're going to broadcast it to everyone in the scene. And what we want to do is send off the message that we are utilizing our first life. So our first life here is going to actually trigger a behavior over in the 2nd object, and that's what's going to help kill off our first life. So if we come back in and edit our logic, so we have our message broadcaster set up now. We have the kill.u message required that sends out the message life.1 to other elements in the scene. At the 2nd time, we need to be able to turn off our first life when the character dies. We no longer need it. We'll be moving on to our 2nd life. So the toggle behavior is useful in this case because we can use it to turn off that first life. And so on the toggle behavior, we are actually on to begin with because our character is alive. We're not using any toggle message. We're simply using our toggle behavior to turn off our first life. So we can use life.1.off. So the loop here is essentially the character receives the message that it's dead, or the number pad does. It sends the message life.1, which is going to send it off to number pad 2. At that time, number pad 2 is going to send a message back to number pad 1 to turn off that particular life. So this one's done now. Let's move forward. We're going to move to the second one, and in the second one, we're going to set it up in kind of the similar fashion. We're just going to chain together. So we're still waiting for the broadcast. We're still waiting for the message kill.u. Again, make sure your syntax is correct. We only want to broadcast the message once, and we're going to trigger life.2. So again, this is going to be the message that gets sent over to the third number pad, which is going to send a message back to the second one to kill it off, or to turn it off, essentially. We can keep them visible. These are going to be invisible in a game, but for now, we won't worry too much about that. And again, we only want the message broadcaster to broadcast once to the next number pad in the chain. As far as the toggle behavior goes in this case, once again, we're not triggering any specific toggle. We're just using two on and off messages to turn on our life and to turn it off as well too. So in this case, I'm going to turn on the first life. So essentially I can turn it back off. And I'm going to make sure that the second life is not actually engaged at this point. So we're going to use life.2.off. And so the speaker component is waiting for that message, life.1. And when it receives the message, life.1, it's turning on that particular life. And you can see that's the message that's getting sent as well too. So that message is actually getting sent into the speaker component. It's waiting for the message life.1. When it receives the message life.1, it sends on the toggle behavior. So it turns the toggle behavior on. That toggle behavior sends the message to the message broadcaster life.2. So we're actually using life.2. We want to make sure that our initial behavior state is off. By turning our initial behavior state off, we're not engaging in our second life at this point. So that looks good. I guess we could put some text in there if we want to. I'm just going to, actually let's go here, let's just call it second life. And then finally, that all looks good there. The speaker here, when the message is spoken, we actually need to turn off. So we're receiving the message, life.1, and we're actually turning off our first life. So remember back on our first speaker component here, or on our first number pad, we have our toggle behavior that turns off that life. So we need to turn that off when the speaker receives that. So in our speaker, we require life.1, and the message when spoken would be life.1.off. Okay, great. And then in the final number pad here, we're going to, again, just chain it up one more notch. So let's start off with editing our logic. We'll start off in the message broadcaster. So we're sending life.3. So this would allow us to use life.3, which would send to the fourth number pad if we were to do a fourth life and a fifth life, etc. We're sending to everybody in the range. We're waiting for our broadcast. Again, our message broadcast required would be kill.u. We get that. We only want to broadcast once, and that takes care of that particular message broadcaster. In the toggle behavior in this case, we want to be able to turn on life.2 so we can essentially turn it off. So we'll use the life.2 to turn that on. We don't need an actual toggle trigger in this case, or a toggle message. We just are sending a message that turns on that life so we can disable it. This would be life.3, so we can know that we're on our third life, or I'll just call it third life. And in this case, we are waiting for a message, and the message we're waiting for is life.2. So we can turn that on, and we don't want it. We want it once, and when we're spoken, we're going to turn off life.2. And we do not want, again, in the toggle behavior, you only want the toggle behavior on the first number pad. And the reason that's useful there is because we're actively on the first life. We're actually waiting to turn on the second number pad, waiting to turn on the third number pad. Therefore, the toggle behavior should be off until the trigger that's coming from the speaker component activates it and turns it on itself. Now, again, exactly in the same way that the checkpoints didn't have an off message in the third checkpoint, if we wanted to put in a fourth life and a fifth life, etc., then we would do that. But as it stands, once we die our third life, we trigger the message life.3, and if you remember, that gets sent out to anybody in the range. And we have here our defeat number pad of gloom and doom, waiting to receive the message life.3, and it'll end the game. So if I put it all together, where are we? Here we are. So die, so we move over to our second life, and I come here, move to our third life, and now that I'm on my third life, if I die, my game's over. So initially when I built my first game, I had an infinite number of lives, and I think I was initially thinking that the idea would be, okay, who can defeat the dungeon crawler game in the fewest number of lives in the shortest time possible, passing the maximum number of quests. However, you realize the functionality of 3 lives as forcing the player to make smarter decisions in the game and not necessarily being as reckless with their characters. In any event, I learned something really valuable from that. Again, I found that the tutorial on the checkpoints was really helpful in trying to figure out how the 3 lives worked. And in summary, again, I just used the global parameters. I took the component that represents the instant death message, specified a specific death message for the character, and then used that death message in a series of message broadcasters to iterate upon a character's potential number of lives. So that would be it. My name is the John Crow, and I hope you were able to learn a little bit from this video. We'll talk to you later.